What's up, everybody? My name is Deidre Neal. I am founder of Feed Worldwide. Feed is an acronym that stands for Facilitate, Educate, Empower, and Develop. Our vision is to help marginalized communities and people utilize their creativity and innovation to help establish wealth and to garner financial success. We're very excited about our Feeding the Renaissance initiative, which is in its 5th year. This year, we're kicking off an online educational program that is designed to feed the minds of our youth with Black history. But this program is really for everyone who wants to be fed knowledge about our ancestors and their contributions to American culture and history, but also world culture and history. So to kick off the initiative, I thought it fitting to begin with a topic that is very pertinent today, and that is voting. So I would like to talk about the Civil War and the amendments that culminated from the war, and then talk about the women's suffrage movement that really started before the Civil War but paralleled that movement. And then I will conclude the discussion talking about a very dynamic and powerful Black woman during that time, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. I wanted to begin the discussion with the Civil War to give some context to the women's suffrage movement, as well as the work that Frances Ellen Watkins Harper committed herself to. So the Civil War began in 1861. The war was fought it was the northern states against the southern states, and the southern states wanted to keep the system of slavery in place, while the northern states wanted to abolish slavery. Both were political and economic focuses. And so the war was fought. It ended in 1865. Lincoln was actually assassinated maybe 8 months after the war. Congress was able to pass the 13th Amendment after the war, which abolished slavery and involuntary servitude. But there was an exception in that amendment that said it was okay in cases of punishment for a crime. And so that clause was important because it's relevant to this day, and it's why we see this mass incarceration and centuries of incarceration for Black people. So after the 13th Amendment, that was the impetus for the Black codes, which eventually led to Jim Crow laws in the South, because Southern states wanted to keep Black people from citizen rights, right? So they hindered that in any way that they could. So when seeing that, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, which gave citizen rights to Black people. At the time, Andrew Johnson was president after Lincoln was assassinated. Although he was for the abolishment of slavery, he was adamant about not giving rights to Black people. So he vetoed the Civil Rights Act. Congress was able to overturn that veto, and to take it a step further, they passed the 14th Amendment, which gave citizenship to Black people. And it also gave them federal protection to ensure those rights. So after that, in 1870, the 15th Amendment was passed, which said no one would be hindered from voting based on race, color, or their previous servitude. That's important because they had to put another act in place, because at every turn, Black people were being hindered from voting. They had poll taxes, they had literacy tests, and they had the grandfather law, which stated that you could not vote unless your grandfather voted previously, which during that time, there was not many people, Black people, who fit that criteria. So the 15th Amendment was important for the women's suffrage movement, which actually started in 1840, because it gave Black men the right to vote. Now, Susan B. Anthony and Cady Stanton were the leads of this women's suffrage movement, middle-class, privileged white women, right? So they were infuriated because how dare this country give Black men the right to vote before white women? And so that separated the women's suffrage movement based on race. But Black women were very strategic during that time, and they were very committed to the cause. So in that, I'm going to go back and talk about this dynamic, brilliant woman, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. So she was born in 1825. At the age of 3, she was born free. At the age of 3, her parents died and left her orphaned. Her uncle, Reverend William Watkins, adopted her. He was a very prominent figure in her life. He was the head of the Negro school, and he was an educator. And this is where she was taught, and she learned about abolitionism and lynching, and she learned about her spirituality. So he was a very important figure in her life. So when she became of age in her early teens, she began to, some say she was a domestic worker, some say that she actually took on an apprenticeship. I don't know if there's a difference in what that means, but where she was working, she had access to a library of books. And that's where her love for books and writing began to flourish. In 1845, at the age of 20, she published her first book of poetry titled Forest Leaves. And she was a very charismatic woman, and she was able to navigate in between white and Black spaces. And this helped garner her relationships with publishers and other white people that helped her along to be able to publish her literature at that time. She also used her personal income to finance benevolent causes such as the Underground Railroad, which she became very active with assisting in that movement. So between 1850 and 1852, she began teaching. She moved to Ohio, my home state, and she was the first teacher to teach at the seminary school there. And then 2 years later, she moved to Pennsylvania, where she began teaching. In Pennsylvania is when she realized her purpose and her journey needed to be with the plight of Black people and freeing slaves and fighting against these causes that she so believed. So at that time, Maryland had passed the fugitive law, which stated that any free Black that traveled back to the state could be arrested as a runaway slave. She heard about this gentleman that was captured when he went back as a free slave, and he ended up being beaten and murdered. And so that really was a turning point for her to really dive into her mission to fight for these causes. She began speaking publicly throughout the country. And remember, this time, women could not even vote, and they definitely could not speak in public places. So it was a risk for her to do that. But she was speaking alongside Frederick Douglass and William Phillips and other abolitionists at that time. So she really put herself on the line, as well as the others, to get this message across and to fight for these movements that she so believed in. She eventually married a gentleman, Mr. Harper, who had 2 children. He unfortunately died a few years after they were married, and so she really was able to throw herself in her writing and her literature, publishing several books and books of poetry after that time. I wanted to highlight her because I appreciated how she used her creativity and her voice to move these issues forward, which is really the impetus of what our organization does and looks to help other young creatives to do. So in concluding, I want to read one of her poems that she wrote that really struck a chord with me. So the title of this poem is Bible Defense of Slavery. Take sackcloth of the darkest dye and shroud the pulpits round. Servants of him that cannot lie, sit mourning on the ground. Let holy horror blanch each cheek, pale every brow with fears. And rocks and stones, if ye could speak, ye will might melt to tears. Let sorrow breathe in every tone, in every strain ye raise. Insult not God's majestic throne with the mockery of your praise. A reverend man whose light should be the guide of age and youth, brings to the shrine of slavery the sacrifice of truth. For the direst wrong by man imposed, since Sodom's fearful cry, the word of life has been unclosed to give your God the lie. Oh, when ye pray for heathen lands and plead for their dark shores, remember slavery's cruel hands make heathens at your doors. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Thank you for journeying with us through our Feeding the Renaissance initiative. We hope that you will stay tuned for the videos to come. Peace and blessings, and God bless.